Part 1. A vast horizon of golden desert. A land once known only for sand, silence, and wandering tribes. Yet beneath those dunes and mountains lay a hidden force, a power waiting to awaken. A force that would, in time, reshape the global economy, redraw political alliances, and become one of the most influential financial engines of the modern world. This is the story of Saudi Arabia, not simply as a kingdom of oil, but as a nation undergoing one of the most ambitious transformations in human history. For decades, the world saw Saudi Arabia through a single lens: oil, black crude, extracted from the earth in unimaginable volumes, fueling cities, armies, technologies, and entire empires. But the story did not begin with oil, and it does not end with it. To understand the rise of Saudi Arabia as a financial powerhouse, one must go back to a world before skyscrapers pierced the desert sky, a world before pipelines traced lines across the sand, a world of tribes, of holy pilgrimage, of survival in the harshest landscapes known to man. Saudi Arabia sits on the Arabian Peninsula, a historic crossroads of trade linking Africa, Asia, and Europe. For thousands of years, caravans carried incense, spices, silk, and stories across these lands. Sacred settlements rose here long before the modern world would recognize their importance. Among them, the ancient city of Mecca, a place central to the faith of over 1 billion Muslims today, a spiritual heart that would define the identity of the region for centuries. Yet spiritually significant as it was, Arabia before the 20th century was not wealthy. The region's economy relied heavily on trade routes, pilgrimage income, agriculture in oasis towns, and nomadic herding. Survival was dictated by environment. Water was scarce, resources were few, and the land itself enforced humility. But history would soon change when a leader emerged, ambitious, strategic, and driven by a vision to unite the tribes of Arabia under one banner: Abdulaziz ibn Saud, known today simply as Ibn Saud, the founder of modern Saudi Arabia. Born in 1876, Ibn Saud came from the House of Saud, a family with deep roots in Arabian tribal politics and religious alliances. The region at that time was fractured. Clans and tribal confederations battled for influence. Foreign empires, including the Ottomans, cast long shadows across the peninsula. But Ibn Saud possessed something few others had: an unwavering belief that Arabia could be unified. Through diplomacy, marriage alliances, tactical warfare, and careful negotiation with religious leaders, Ibn Saud unified region after region, step by step, year by year, until finally, in 1932, he declared the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. A kingdom carved not by colonial decree, but through determination and strategy. Yet even then, the new kingdom was modest, its resources limited. Many Western analysts of the time saw little reason to pay attention to it. Its greatest wealth, they believed, lay in its religious significance rather than material potential. But below the surface of its deserts, something ancient and powerful was waiting. Something that would soon alter the fate of nations. Oil. The moment that changed Saudi Arabia's destiny began quietly. In 1933, Ibn Saud granted oil exploration rights to an American corporation that would eventually become known as Standard Oil of California. The early surveys were difficult. The desert was vast, the heat relentless, the technology limited. Many geologists suspected there was oil to be found, but few could guess the scale. Then, in 1938, in a quiet well called Dammam No. 7, oil burst from the earth. A fountain of black energy shot skyward. This discovery was not just oil, it was the key to a new global order. As World War II approached, the world's appetite for oil surged. Europe industrialized. America expanded its automobile culture. New aircraft, ships, and machines demanded fuel. Oil became the bloodstream of modern civilization, and Saudi Arabia sat atop some of the largest reserves on Earth. The United States recognized the geopolitical significance immediately. In 1945, King Abdulaziz and U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt held a historic meeting aboard the USS Quincy in the Suez Canal. They forged an understanding. The United States would provide security guarantees, and in return, Saudi Arabia would ensure stable oil supplies. This relationship would echo through decades of diplomacy, wars, and alliances. A relationship that still, to this day, defines global power structures. As oil production expanded, money began flowing into the kingdom at unprecedented levels. But wealth alone cannot build a nation. It must be directed. And in Saudi Arabia, the ruling royal family held the authority to guide that direction. The Saudi government established ministries, national oversight bodies, and international contracts to manage oil revenue. Key infrastructure projects began: highways, ports, power plants, schools, hospitals, and cities. By the 1970s, oil prices skyrocketed following geopolitical upheaval in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia became one of the wealthiest states in the world almost overnight. Skyscrapers rose, industries formed, the Saudi riyal strengthened. The kingdom funded massive development projects, both domestically and abroad. Yet even as wealth accelerated, something deeper was taking shape: a consciousness of responsibility. Saudi Arabia had become the custodian of Islam's two holiest cities, Mecca and Medina. Millions would travel to the kingdom every year on pilgrimage. This was not merely economic. It was cultural, spiritual, and foundational to Saudi national identity. But wealth brings challenges. And the rapid modernization of Saudi Arabia introduced tensions. New technologies, new social norms, and new ideas entered the country faster than society could adapt. The kingdom faced a balancing act, preserving tradition while navigating the pressures of global change. Then, a turning point. By the end of the 20th century, global energy landscapes began to shift. The world started exploring renewable sources, alternatives to fossil fuels, and the possibility that oil could someday lose its supremacy. Many nations dependent on oil exports struggled with this uncertainty. Saudi Arabia did not ignore this reality. Instead, it began planning for a future beyond oil. This shift was strategic, deliberate, and grounded in long-term national vision. The leadership of the kingdom recognized that true power, lasting, resilient power, must evolve. And so began one of the most significant economic transformation plans of the 21st century, Vision 2030. But before this transformation could fully begin, the kingdom would encounter a new kind of challenge. A challenge that would test its identity, its alliances, and its ability to adapt to an increasingly interconnected world. The world's perception of Saudi Arabia was changing. Global politics shifted, cultural expectations evolved, economic power structures realigned, and Saudi Arabia stood in the center of all of it, powerful, influential, and under scrutiny. Part 2. The 21st century arrived carrying a new world, a world shaped by technology, by globalization, and by accelerating change. And within this world, Saudi Arabia faced a choice: remain defined by the past, or redefine the future. The leadership of the kingdom saw clearly that oil, while still powerful, would not remain supreme forever. The global economy was shifting. Nations looked toward renewables. Trade routes moved. Capital flowed to data, infrastructure, and innovation rather than fossil fuels alone. The question was no longer whether the world's energy landscape would change, but how fast it would happen and who would lead it. This was the moment when Saudi Arabia chose to transform. At the center of this transformation stood a young leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Born in 1985, he came of age in a world completely different from that of his forefathers. He understood both the traditions of Saudi history and the demands of the modern global economy. And he introduced a plan that would define the kingdom's path forward: Vision 2030. Announced in 2016, Vision 2030 was not simply a reform program. It was an economic rebirth, a blueprint to diversify the Saudi economy away from oil, to build new industries, to open new markets, to shift global perceptions, and to prepare Saudi Arabia for a post-oil world without relinquishing its leadership in energy. The plan was vast, structured around three primary pillars: a dynamic society, a thriving economy, and an ambitious nation. In practical terms, this meant investment. Investment in education, in tourism, in logistics, in technology, in entertainment, and in the creation of entirely new cities built for the future. Among these new cities was a project unlike any the world had seen before. NEOM, a mega project stretching across an area roughly the size of Belgium. A futuristic region designed to integrate clean energy, smart infrastructure, and advanced biotechnology. NEOM was envisioned as a hub where innovation could flourish, attracting scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, and thinkers from across the globe. At the core of NEOM was a proposal known as The Line, a 170-kilometer-long linear city with no cars, no pollution, and no traditional road networks. The concept was bold. Some called it visionary, others called it impossible. But one thing was undeniable. It captured the world's attention. Saudi Arabia was no longer simply extracting wealth from beneath the ground. It was building new economies above it. The kingdom also began expanding its investments globally. Through the Public Investment Fund, Saudi Arabia deployed its wealth into international markets, acquiring stakes in major technology companies, entertainment firms, automotive innovators, and global financial institutions. This strategy was deliberate. The kingdom was positioning itself not only as an energy supplier, but as a global investor. But while Vision 2030 looked outward, it also turned inward. It sought to reshape daily life within Saudi Arabia. New cultural institutions opened. Concerts, film theaters, sport events, and arts festivals emerged. Restrictions on public spaces and social engagement evolved. The kingdom began to open itself to international visitors, not just pilgrims, but tourists, investors, and collaborators. Millions who had never imagined traveling to Saudi Arabia now walked its cities, visited its historical sites, and explored its ancient landscapes. The rock-carved tombs of Alula, the old markets of Jeddah, the modern towers of Riyadh. Yet this transformation came with complexities. Social change is never simple. Rapid modernization can generate tension between traditional values and new cultural influences. The kingdom faced internal debates and global criticism. The world watched closely. Every step was analyzed, every decision questioned. But transformation on this scale has never been easy for any nation. The industrialization of Britain, the modernization of Japan, the rise of South Korea, all required decades of adaptation, debate, and sacrifice. Saudi Arabia's transition followed this same path: strategic, intentional, and not without cost. Still, the momentum continued. The kingdom recognized that global influence depends on more than economics alone. It depends on diplomacy, stability, leadership, cultural presence, and narrative. Saudi Arabia expanded its diplomatic engagements, becoming a mediator in regional conflicts and an active voice in global energy policy. It strengthened relations with China, with Europe, with India, and with the nations of Africa. It redefined its relationship with the United States, not as a dependency, but as a strategic partnership. Meanwhile, the kingdom invested heavily in renewable energy. Solar farms emerged across the desert. Projects in hydrogen fuel technology advanced. Saudi Arabia sought not just to supply the world's oil, but to lead the global transition beyond it. This was not abandonment of identity, it was evolution. For the first time in its modern history, Saudi Arabia began shaping not just the world's energy markets, but its narratives, innovations, and investments. The kingdom positioned itself not at the periphery of global progress, but at its center. Yet the story does not end here. For every rise in power, history demands a question. What is the true cost of transformation? In Part 3, we explore the challenges, controversies, geopolitical stakes, and the uncertain but powerful future of Saudi Arabia, a nation poised between tradition and global ambition. Part 3. Transformation is never without pressure. When a nation rises, especially one anchored in centuries of tradition, the world watches with scrutiny, curiosity, and sometimes suspicion. Saudi Arabia's journey into the modern age has been no exception. As the kingdom pursued its vision of economic diversification and global influence, new questions emerged. Questions about stability, identity, and power. Saudi Arabia holds a unique position in the world. It is the birthplace of Islam, home to Mecca and Medina, and the spiritual center point for more than 1 billion Muslims. This alone grants the kingdom a profound cultural and religious responsibility. Yet, simultaneously, the nation is a global energy leader, controlling some of the largest oil reserves ever discovered. It sits at the crossroads of ancient pilgrimage and modern geopolitics. Balancing these roles is not simple. As the kingdom expanded its economic ambitions, it also found itself navigating shifting global alliances. The United States, once the central partner in the Saudi oil security agreement, began reshaping its foreign policy interests. Meanwhile, China emerged as a dominant economic force. Saudi Arabia began engaging with both, not as a dependent actor, but as a sovereign strategist. This is the hallmark of a rising financial power, the ability to choose rather than be chosen for. Yet global power attracts global attention. Critics question the pace and transparency of reforms. Human rights debates surfaced. International media narratives shifted. The kingdom responded by asserting sovereignty, stating that modernization would proceed on Saudi terms, respecting cultural identity while expanding possibility. Still, beneath headlines and politics lies something deeper, a nation genuinely preparing for the future. Saudi Arabia understands a fundamental truth of the modern era. Power belongs to those who invest, diversify, and adapt. And so, the kingdom expanded its financial foothold far beyond oil. The Public Investment Fund, now one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world, began channeling capital into industries shaping the next century: artificial intelligence, autonomous transportation, clean energy and hydrogen fuel, medical research, tourism and cultural preservation, sports and global entertainment. International observers watched as the kingdom placed calculated stakes in global companies, becoming shareholders in automotive innovators, film studios, sports leagues, gaming firms, and financial markets. The effect was unmistakable. Saudi Arabia was positioning itself not simply as a participant in global commerce, but as an architect within it. Yet while investment expanded abroad, something equally significant began happening at home. The kingdom opened new universities and research centers. Young Saudis pursued careers in engineering, medicine, economics, aviation, and entrepreneurship. Women entered the workforce in numbers never seen before in the kingdom's history. Cultural festivals drew tens of thousands. International tourism surged. A generation found its voice, and modern cities rose from the desert. Riyadh evolved into an international business hub. Jeddah grew into a maritime gateway linking Africa and the Middle East. NEOM advanced as a symbol of the future, a city imagined not as a continuation of the past, but as a redefinition of what cities can be. Yet change always carries shadows. The kingdom faced criticism from abroad. Domestic reform created tension between new opportunities and long-held expectations. Global energy transition created volatility in oil markets. Regional rivalries with Iran, with shifting alliances in the Gulf, tested diplomacy. The digital age amplified every decision into the realm of global judgment. But history teaches that great transformations have always been turbulent. The modernization of Europe reshaped empires. The industrial rise of the United States altered global power structures. The ascendance of Japan and South Korea redefined Asia's economic order. None were linear. None were simple. Saudi Arabia's transformation follows this same course, determined, ambitious, and deeply consequential. And now, the kingdom stands at a defining moment. Oil remains powerful, but the world is changing. Technology accelerates. Climate policy evolves. Global markets shift. Nations rise and fall on their ability to adapt. Saudi Arabia's future depends not on the wells beneath its deserts, but on the minds, innovation, and strategic vision of its people. A financial powerhouse is not built on resources alone, but on the discipline to evolve beyond them. The story of Saudi Arabia is still being written. It is a story of a nation standing between ancient heritage and bold future. A story of a land once defined by silence, now shaping conversations across continents. A story of power, economic, cultural, and spiritual, emerging not suddenly, but with intention. As the world reorients itself for the decades ahead, one truth grows clearer. Saudi Arabia is not simply adapting to the future, it is preparing to help define it. The desert wind still moves across the dunes as it did thousands of years ago. Pilgrims still walk toward the holy cities. The sun still rises over horizons shaped by sand and stone, but now skyscrapers stand where once only tents stood. Satellites trace paths above places once navigated only by stars, and beneath this land, and within its people, lies the same force that shaped its past. Endurance, ambition, vision. The world is watching, and the next chapter has only just begun.